For decades, the American dream promised that hard work, determination, and perseverance would lead to a comfortable middle-class life, a life of stability, opportunity, and upward mobility. For generations, the middle class was seen as the backbone of America, driving consumer spending, supporting communities, and fueling national growth. But today, that dream is under siege. Across the United States, millions of Americans are witnessing the slow and steady collapse of the middle class. Wages have stagnated, costs have soared, and the gap between the rich and the struggling has widened dramatically. The truth about America's middle-class collapse is not the result of a single factor, but the cumulative effect of decades of economic mismanagement, policy failures, and structural changes in a rapidly evolving global economy. In the post-World War II era, America experienced unprecedented economic growth. Manufacturing boomed, labor unions were strong and stable, well-paying jobs formed the foundation of a thriving middle class. Families enjoyed the fruits of economic progress: homeownership, quality education, and the promise of a secure future. The American dream was within reach for millions. However, starting in the 1970s, significant changes began to unravel this prosperity. Globalization, technological advancements, and shifting trade patterns transformed the economic landscape, leading to the decline of traditional manufacturing jobs and the rise of service sector employment. While these changes brought new opportunities for some, they also left many workers facing uncertain and precarious conditions. One of the central issues contributing to the collapse of the middle class is wage stagnation. Despite substantial gains in worker productivity over the past several decades, the wages of the average American have remained virtually flat when adjusted for inflation. While corporate profits and the incomes of the wealthiest individuals have soared, the average worker's paycheck has seen little improvement. This disconnect means that, despite increased productivity, most workers are not sharing in the nation's economic success. Instead, their purchasing power has diminished, leaving them unable to afford the rising costs of everyday life. The high cost of living is another critical factor. Housing, once a cornerstone of middle-class stability, has become prohibitively expensive in many parts of the country. Home prices in major metropolitan areas have soared, making it increasingly difficult for young families to achieve the dream of homeownership. Many Americans now find themselves forced to rent, with rental costs consuming an ever larger portion of their income. This housing crisis is not limited to major cities. Even suburban areas have experienced dramatic price increases, reducing the availability of affordable options and further straining household budgets. Healthcare is another significant burden that has contributed to the collapse of the middle class. The United States spends more on healthcare per capita than any other nation, yet millions remain uninsured or underinsured. The high cost of medical care, compounded by expensive insurance premiums and out-of-pocket expenses, has created a situation where a single medical emergency can lead to crippling debt. Medical expenses are now one of the leading causes of bankruptcy in the country, undermining the financial security that once defined the middle-class experience. Education, once a reliable path to economic mobility, has also become a source of immense financial strain. Over the past few decades, the cost of higher education has skyrocketed, forcing many students to take on burdensome debt. The average student loan borrower now owes tens of thousands of dollars, a debt load that can take decades to repay. This overwhelming burden of student debt not only delays critical life milestones like homeownership, but also limits the ability of young people to invest in their futures, perpetuating a cycle of economic insecurity. Income inequality has grown to unprecedented levels, further eroding the middle class. The wealthiest 1% of Americans now hold a disproportionately large share of the nation's wealth, while the economic security of the average worker has declined. Tax policies over the past several decades, including significant tax cuts for corporations and the wealthy, have exacerbated this disparity. As the gap between rich and poor widens, opportunities for upward mobility diminish, and economic growth becomes less inclusive. The middle class, which once served as a stabilizing force in society, is gradually being squeezed out. Globalization and the outsourcing of jobs have also played a critical role in the collapse of the middle class. As companies seek to reduce costs by moving production overseas, millions of manufacturing jobs that once provided stable incomes have disappeared. The shift from a manufacturing-based economy to one dominated by the service and technology sectors has left many workers without the skills required to compete in the new economy. This structural transformation has led to underemployment and job insecurity, particularly among those who once relied on stable, well-paying jobs in traditional industries. The rise of the gig economy further complicates the picture. While gig work offers flexibility, it also creates precarious employment conditions. Many workers now find themselves in temporary or freelance roles that lack benefits, job security, and predictable income. This transition has left a significant portion of the workforce vulnerable to economic shocks, as the safety nets once provided by traditional employment have all but vanished. For many, the flexibility of gig work is outweighed by the financial instability it brings. Government policies have been a major contributing factor to these trends. Over the years, economic policies have increasingly favored deregulation, corporate tax cuts, and measures that benefit the wealthy. These policies have led to an environment where the prosperity generated by economic growth is not shared equally. The decline of labor unions, once powerful advocates for workers' rights, has further weakened the bargaining power of the middle class, resulting in lower wages and diminished job security. Policy decisions that prioritize short-term gains for corporations over long-term economic stability have left the majority of Americans struggling to keep up with rising costs and stagnant incomes. The political implications of this economic decline are profound. The middle class has long been considered the backbone of American democracy, a stable base that supports social cohesion and civic engagement. However, as financial insecurity grows and economic opportunity diminishes, political polarization and social unrest become more pronounced. The erosion of the middle class not only undermines the economy, but also destabilizes the very fabric of society, leading to an environment of mistrust and disillusionment. Amid these challenges, various proposals have emerged as potential remedies. Some experts advocate for raising the minimum wage and strengthening labor protections to ensure that workers receive a fair share of the nation's economic growth. Others call for comprehensive healthcare reform to reduce the financial burden on families, while investments in education and job training are seen as essential for equipping the workforce for the demands of a modern, technology-driven economy. There is also a growing consensus that tax policies need to be reformed to redistribute wealth more equitably, thereby narrowing the gap between the richest and the average worker. Yet, the solutions are not simple, and political will remains in short supply. The deeply entrenched interests that have benefited from the current system are unlikely to give up their advantages without significant pressure from both the public and political leaders. The challenge, therefore, is to build a coalition that can drive the reforms necessary to revive the American middle class. A coalition that must span political divides and prioritize long-term economic stability over short-term gains. The collapse of America's middle class is not merely an economic issue. It is a social and political crisis with far-reaching implications. The middle class has traditionally served as the engine of consumer spending, which drives the nation's economic growth. When this critical group is weakened, overall demand falls, leading to slower growth and fewer job opportunities. Moreover, as more Americans face financial hardship, social mobility declines, and the sense of shared purpose that once united communities begins to disintegrate. Looking forward, the future of the American middle class will depend on a series of difficult choices. Policymakers must balance the need for economic growth with the imperative to provide a safety net for those who have been left behind. This requires not only immediate reforms, but also a long-term strategy to rebuild a fairer, more inclusive economy. Investing in education, healthcare, affordable housing, and job training will be crucial to creating an environment where everyone can share in the nation's prosperity. At the same time, corporate practices and tax policies must be reformed to ensure that the wealth generated by economic progress benefits all Americans, not just a privileged few. The truth about America's middle-class collapse is a complex narrative of missed opportunities, policy failures, and structural economic changes. It is a story of how decades of neglect, combined with a rapidly changing global economy, have conspired to undermine the stability that once defined the American dream. For those who once believed that hard work would lead to a better life, the current reality is a sobering reminder that the promise of upward mobility is increasingly out of reach. If the middle class continues to erode, the consequences will be felt not just in individual households but across the entire nation. Economic growth will slow, political polarization will intensify, and the social fabric of America could be forever altered. The collapse of the middle class is a clarion call to action, a reminder that the promise of the American dream must be actively preserved through deliberate policy choices and a commitment to shared prosperity. Thank you for joining us in this comprehensive exploration of the truth behind America's middle-class collapse. If you found this analysis insightful, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. We invite you to join the conversation. What do you think are the most critical steps needed to revive the American middle class? Stay tuned for more in-depth discussions on global economic trends and the forces shaping our world.